So I just want to spend a few minutes talking about the World Sustainability Collective. And after that, we'll listen to Ade's presentation, then the Q&A session, and then we'll wrap up. We'll probably wrap up about 9 o'clock. But if we continue over that, then and you're having a conversation that doesn't include Ade, he can obviously go off and do other things. But we will have a hard stop at 9:25. Okay. So briefly, why did we found the World Sustainability Collective? Well, its purpose is to unite sustainable businesses worldwide and to gain a significant voice in the world's sustainability debate to make a greater collective impact than individually. We believe that business is a disruptor for improving sustainability, but usually it's through SMEs starting up a new idea, and individually they're doing great work, but they don't have necessarily the impact that they could have if they came together collectively. So it's a long-term purpose that we're looking to achieve. And this eclectic group of people and businesses will form this movement I've talked about. And what we're hoping is that it educates and changes attitudes of the public at large, and it will inspire others to start their own sustainable business ideas. At the same time, you can improve your own business performance and showcase your business to a global audience. And that's why we run these events, but also we run podcasts where our members are able to showcase their business in more detail. So what are we? Well, it's a not-for-profit, member-driven collective that supports delivery of the UN's 17 sustainability goals. So that's the way we define sustainability in its broadest sense. So both social and environmental and economic impacts. Members will be able to provide one another with support, synergistic partnerships and business opportunities through the LinkedIn group that we have established, obviously on LinkedIn. And the group consists of sustainable businesses, those who wish to have a sustainable business, sustainability service providers, and obviously enthusiastic individuals. So if you join, your business can benefit by improving that business performance through what we call build your business better, bigger, and bolder. And that concept is able to be delivered from quality experience support providers that provide value for your business in both delivery, scalability, and growth, as well as optimizing the scope of the original idea. And how we're going to do that is you'll be able to be involved in activities through that group that I mentioned on LinkedIn to network, access experienced business mentors, sustainability services. And what I mean by that are people who provide things like carbon footprint analysis for your business, as well as consultants who can support you with sustainability projects. So you can access consultancy to support your transition to a sustainable business model and incorporate detailed sustainable capability development, as well as change management support to achieve that transition. So if you're interested in joining or knowing more about it, then please just put yes, Bill in the chat with your contact details, and we'll set up a one-to-one and we can talk about it in a bit more detail. So that's all I wish to say this morning about WSC, but if you're interested, then please put your details in the chat. So we'd like to welcome Ade this morning, and he's going to talk about intelligent leadership and how to capitalize on increasing disruption, which I'm sure you all recognize that we're facing. So Ade brings around 4 decades of experience acquired at the forefront of business and technology. He has great insights on how the world is changing and how we need to adapt both personally and organizationally. And he's founded the Intelligent Leadership Hub, which is a collective of leaders and leadership experts focused on helping leaders create highly adaptive organizations optimized for fairness and sustainability. and I am delighted to be part of this group. Ade has extensively researched the practices of the most forward-thinking organisations and governments, seeking insights into achieving organisation and societal success. Drawing upon disciplines such as anthropology, neuroscience, biology, technology, and human performance, he has developed a transformational approach to thriving in a world where the future is increasingly unknowable. So I'm sure you're all looking forward to hearing from Ade, and I'm going to welcome him to share his screen once I've got out of my screen, Ade. Sorry, I just have to end the show and stop the sharing. So it's now all yours. So thank you very much indeed, Ade.
Thank you, Bill. Delighted to have the opportunity to share my perspectives on intelligent leadership, and in particular, why we need it. So let's make a start. Imagine you're the captain of a football team and you spend the whole match continuously chasing the ball around the pitch, issuing instructions to your players closest to the ball. Now, after a while, you're going to start to get tired. And as a result, your team is going to miss opportunities. It's going to fumble the management of threats because the players are not receiving your instructions because you're not there. And that's in a game where there is, the rules are very clear. There is only one ball. The objective is very clear. And this type of game is known as the finite game. Everything is very, very clear. This is the game that organizations have played throughout the industrial era, and oddly, they've played it in this ridiculous manner. However, we're now leaving the industrial era into a world where there are multiple balls, an indeterminate number of balls of different shapes and sizes. The rules, it's not very clear what the rules are. Even the size of the pitch seems to vary. And this, in essence, is the infinite game. So whether we like it or not, thanks to increasing disruption, we find ourselves playing the infinite game. So looking now at what it means to be intelligent. Are you intelligent if, for example, you have a high IQ and multiple academic qualifications? Are you still intelligent if you can barely run for a bus or take on the most trivial of physical tasks? And are you intelligent if on a long-haul flight, you're suffering great anxiety because your fellow passenger is dominating the armrest? We need to rethink what intelligence actually is. And I would say intelligence is our ability to stay in the game. Our parents, our ancestors were very intelligent. The fact that we're here today is living proof of that. Essentially, to be intelligent means being able to handle adversity. There is a strong correlation between our exposure to adversity and our intelligence. This is a problem for modern society because we actually place a lot of emphasis on comfort and convenience. This is making us less intelligent, and this has existential implications for both humanity and the species with which we share this planetary ecosystem. So being intelligent is much more than having a high IQ. So getting back to the passenger situation on the plane, imagine if you discover that the individual sitting next to you is some sort of assassin or enforcer for an organized drug cartel. You would be intelligent if you were to remove your elbow promptly from the armrest. You would be intelligent if you were to engage the person in a conversation, to let them know that you're not a threat of any sort. And you might even be considered very intelligent if you formed a connection with them, because who knows when in the future you might need someone with a particular skill set acquired over a long career. The most successful human operating model of all time, and one optimized for the harshest of conditions, is that of the tribe. We were all tribal up until around 12,000 years ago. Human adaptations take around 25,000 years, so we're still wired to be tribal. Tribes fundamentally do three things. They sense what's happening in their environment, they decide what to do based on that data, and then they act. This is emotional intelligence, intellectual intelligence, and physical intelligence. This is what they do all day long, every day. This is how you survive on the savannah. Given that we're naturally wired to be tribal, we might as well capitalize on that in our organizations. So again, being intelligent is much more than just being able to decide. We need to be able to sense what's happening in our environment. And most importantly, we need to be able to act. Now, there are organizations out there that are thriving on adversity, a bit like a samurai warrior. The more time they spend in battle, the bigger, the stronger, the more skillful they become, and even the happier they seem to become. This characteristic of growing stronger through adversity is a characteristic of living organisms, from amoebas right through to humans. Our environment shapes and even determines our DNA. In many respects, the macro-environmental signals bearing down on us are DNA adaptation and expression signals. Those of us that can detect early signs of danger are more likely to survive. After several generations, we all have that characteristic, because those that didn't survive. This characteristic of growing stronger through adversity is referred to by author Nicholas Nassim Taleb as anti-fragility. I prefer to call it super resilience, not least because it's easier to say, but also to highlight that resilience is not enough. Resilience is the grit and determination that gets us through the storm. But there is the assumption that the storm will come to an end at some time, and we simply have to endure it. Super resilience recognizes that if anything, the storm is going to get worse. So rather than fight it or endure it, we need to embrace it. We need to dance with it. We need to surf it, capitalize on it, so to speak. So my view is that we need to build super resilient organizations that are less like inert factories and more like living, sensing organisms. So looking now at intelligence, the term leader and leadership, or the terms leader and leadership, are often used interchangeably, but they're not quite that. Intelligence is essentially our ability to survive. So I've chosen wolves here because they're kind of perhaps vicious, but they're highly intelligent and they're highly social. So sorry, moving on now to leadership. I've mentioned that the terms are used interchangeably. However, they are different. We have been sold the idea that of the heroic leader, so to speak, someone who is simply better than us, can solve all our problems, ride into town, sort out the bad guys, and then head off into the horizon on to their next adventure. Many organizations today have this heroic leadership model, but where they don't, they typically have a very centralized approach. And that essentially means a handful of people are making all the big decisions, often from a well-appointed room. Again, this leads to missed opportunity and fumbled management of threats. And this typical leadership model tends to treat people as disposable cogs. The factory model philosophy is system first, people second. And so all we need are cogs for the machine. And as long as they meet the cog specification or the job specification, we can swap them in and out as needed. In many respects, in this kind of setup, in most organizational setups, HR is merely an extension of the procurement function. So we need to move to a more decentralized model, a more distributed model of leadership, perhaps even a ubiquitous model of leadership, where everybody is a leader, given, depending on the context, whoever's closest to the ball is the leader at that point in time. One of the characteristics of moving into this era of increasing disruption is that strategic planning is becoming a genre of fiction. The fighter pilot that plans his or her maneuvers before going up into the air will not be involved in many dogfights. As philosopher Mike Tyson once pointed out, the plan goes out the window after the first punch. Situational awareness trumps strategic planning. Again, we're in the infinite game, and there is only one rule in the infinite game, and that is to stay in the game. So leadership is less about the individual. It's more about the organization's ability, the organism's ability to sense, decide, and act what is happening based on what is happening in the environment. So think of leadership as a kind of nervous system, and the more distributed that nervous system is, the better. And the more distributed, the more ubiquitous it is, the more we have ability on the edge, in the field, so to speak, to make decisions for the organization, the more effective the organization will be. So leadership in many respects is simply sensing, deciding, and acting continually in real time. You might say that, we need people, we need leaders, we need everybody to be leaders, essentially the person closest to the ball at that time. And perhaps to restate that for the post-industrial world, we need the person closest to a ball to be the leader at that point in time. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to look at kind of where we are in general through a number of different lenses, and then we will look at where we need to go next. So we're going to look at what's the rationale, the motive for the organization, the leadership model, and so on. So most organizations today are, in essence, factories. They may not be hard hats and conveyor belts and so on, but they are essentially process first. Efficiency is the god, and this is why we have Lean, Six Sigma, total quality management, etc., etc. Now, I'm not talking necessarily about actual factories. Many service companies are factories. It's just that they have data moving along the conveyor belt. There's a couple of key points here. One is, as a species, not only have we successfully adapted to the harshest environments over all time, we've got to the point where we started to architect our own environments, and the workplace would be an example of that. The other important fact is that humans have a natural tendency to be curious, to be creative, to be courageous. It is these capabilities that have enabled us to adapt to get to where we are today. However, if we were to express those characteristics in the typical workplace today, we would end up having a stern conversation with HR, and we'd be told to follow the operations manual and get back to work. So when you consider that our environment shapes our DNA, and certainly the expression of our DNA, and given how long humans typically spend in the workplace today, you could argue that the modern workplace is genetically mutilating us. The modern workplace is not optimized for humans. Turning now to technology, there's a lot of talk about digital transformation. And what's not to like about digital transformation? What's not to like about faster, smarter, cheaper? Well, at the end of the day, a faster, smarter, cheaper Titanic is still a Titanic. And even one optimized to detect icebergs is no match for air travel. Simply sprinkling your existing old school business model with technology pixie dust is not going to protect it from an unknowable future. This is a myth propagated by the World Economic Forum. The transformation we need to see in organizations today is much more profound. Looking now at people, we've already seen the automation of blue-collar work over a number of decades. We're now seeing the blue-collarization of white-collar work. None of us are safe. None of us know what we'll be doing in the next few years. You might say the new definition of talent is being able to do something that an algorithm or a robot or an AI tool cannot do that is of value to the market. So these are things like creativity, thinking in terms of constructs, emotional intelligence, and picking up on weak signals in very small data sets. The banks, for example, are in a race to the bottom. They are becoming technology factories where they'll get rid of most people. They will eventually be operating at 100% efficiency. However, they'll be operating at 0% margin because eventually all the other banks will be doing the same. Most organizations today are focused on making a profit. This leads to very short-term thinking. And even in the public sector, where they're not thinking about making a profit, they are thinking all the time about efficiency, which again leads to very short-term thinking. This is not good for suppliers. It's not good for the talent. It's not good for the customer. It's not good for the community. And it's certainly not good for the planet. From a societal perspective, we've seen the internet enable us to communicate with each other, the Internet of Things, allowing devices to communicate with each other. As portables become wearables, as wearables become embeddables, the Internet of Things becomes the Internet of Things in people. We're on a convergence course with technology, and we have been since the very first day we picked up a rock to do something or someone. Since then, we've seen increasing human augmentation thanks to technology. One could argue that we're speciating from Homo sapiens to Homo extensis, or augmented man. Now, whether you believe we're speciating or not, we're certainly becoming more augmented, and that has profound implications for us as service providers. It has profound implications for the planet. And one of the more dystopian characteristics of this is that we're spending more and more of our time staring at glass in the digital realm. This makes us more susceptible to emotional programming and acting in ways that are not in our own best interests. One could argue that the metaverse is the final chapter in the matrix, so to speak, where we spend our time 24/7 in the digital realm and thus are always programmable. So where are we? The motive is profit. The leadership model, as we've talked about, is highly centralized with this sort of industrial model. The operating model is that of a factory. Technology is used primarily for automation. People are merely cogs in the machine. The exploitative resources-oriented nature of this model is sort of both unsustainable and taking us down a dystopian path. So, where do we go from here? Well, there are organizations out there that are failing on a regular basis, yet somehow or other are doing very well. Failure is a consequence of experimentation, and experimentation is the price we pay for innovation, and innovation is necessary because we are facing increasingly novel situations. Amazon is continually tinkering with its fulfillment centers. Facebook at any given time has 10,000 experiments on the go. Looking at this from a slightly different perspective, Netflix updates its business model every 4 minutes, Google every 30 seconds, Amazon every 4 seconds. These are highly adaptive organizations optimized for increasing disruption. My concern with traditional organizations, most organizations out there today, what with their sort of emphasis on efficiency, they're not going to achieve the failure velocity necessary to adapt to an increasingly changing world. Turning now again to technology, we've already seen that technology has a role to play in automation. This is essentially digital transformation, and that's no bad thing. However, you can't be sure that your business model will be around for any length of time. So simply having one business model that's highly digitalized is highly risky. So in essence, we should be running portfolios of different business models. In that respect, technology has a role to play, different go-to-markets, different financial models, different products and services. But innovation doesn't come about through technology on its own. Essentially, we need humans in the loop. We need to build our organizations around humans. But if we, if you like, wrap technology around them, so to speak, then we've got super innovators. So technology very much has a role to play in innovation. Dwelling a little bit on AI, I'm a child of the 60s, though you'd never guess, and I thought by the year 2000 we'd have full anthropomorphic robots in the home. That hasn't happened, and I'm very sad about that. In essence, AI has not evolved very much in the last half century. In fact, what we have today is artificial intelligence. Until neuroscientists really get to understand how the mind works, how consciousness works, that's as good as what we will have. The developments we have seen today are essentially maths parlor tricks, machine learning. That's not to say that it isn't impressive. AI's ability to detect, to make decisions, to create new content is very, very impressive, is going to change society, is going to change the future of work. We're already seeing the acting profession up in arms about the implications for their industry, the fact that they will no longer need to be present at the making of a film, or they will no longer need to be alive at the making of a film. In my view, they've left this far too late. They should have seen the writing on the wall with the arrival of cartoons. But the bottom line here is that you can be sure that your carpet cleaning robot is not having thoughts of insurrection. Turning now back to people, we saw that the banks, for example, are in a race to the bottom. They'll become eventually technology factories, 0% margin, or 0% margin, 100% efficiency. They'll realize that in order to move back up the value stack, they're going to have to reintroduce people, not corporate compliant cogs for the factory machine, but people whose thoughts and innovations give rise to differentiated customer experiences that command a high margin. These are people like Salvador Dali, Lady Gaga, Pablo Picasso, brilliant at what they do, but perhaps a little bit of a HR nightmare. Now, I'm not an anthropologist, but I studied the work of anthropologists, and I've identified 9 characteristics that define what it means to be human. If we can express all of these in the course of the day, or feel these in the course of the day, we will feel as if we have lived as humans are supposed to live. Companies like Facebook and Apple and Microsoft have recognized this, and they've baked these anthropological drivers into their organization, into their workplaces, so to speak. They recognize that people that feel more human feel less anxious, and the less anxious you are, the more cognition you have available to doing innovative work. These organizations realize that they're in the cognition management business. In fact, what these organizations have created are cognitive gymnasiums, where the people are less cogs and more cognitive athletes, and their bosses are in fact cognitive coaches. This requires a high degree of trust because a coach-athlete relationship is an intimate relationship. And the beauty of this model is that when you have the best athletes coming to your organization, they will attract further great athletes, because great athletes need to work out with other great athletes. In many respects, this is the future of talent management. We mentioned earlier that many organizations are focused on making a profit, but there are some organizations out there that are focused on growing assets. Fitbit, John Deere, Rolls-Royce, they see data as an asset and they're turning it into value for their customers. Amazon sees your wallet as an asset, it wants to own it. Facebook, similarly with your mind. These organizations recognize that focusing on assets rather than making a profit gives them a buffer against an uncertain future. Focusing on assets allows them to take more risks. Focusing on assets allows them to acquire and retain the best people. You could say that organizations that focus on making a profit are like the kids that failed the famous Stanford marshmallow test. And most importantly, we need to realize that the most important asset of all, the asset on which all the other assets rely on for their value, is this natural capital. That needs to be at the forefront of organizational progress, if you like. So looking at this from a slightly different angle now, this is the typical model of an organization today in terms of its use of cognitive capital. Essentially, there's a handful of people making all the decisions, the leadership team, so to speak, for the rest of us. Because they're making all the decisions, they are in essence creating all the value. And because they are creating all the value, they are getting all the rewards. This leads to economic inequality and social disparity. This is why the CEO of McDonald's earns 1,000 times more than the median salary of the typical worker. And that's because he deserves it. And he deserves it not because he's 1,000 times more brilliant, it's because he has suppressed the cognitive abilities of the workforce. This is malgovernance at its highest. We need to move to a more ubiquitous, more intelligent leadership approach, because if we do, where everybody is a leader, where everybody plays a part in the decision making based on the context they find themselves in, then the more distributed the decision making, the more distributed the value creation, the more distributed the reward distribution. This is going to be better for economic equality and for a reduction in social disparity. We need to move down this intelligent leadership route. So again, this is where we are: profit, centralized leadership, factory model, technology primarily polishing the existing processes, and people being treated in this genetically harmful manner. This is unsustainable. It was optimized for the finite game, which kind of worked during the industrial era, but certainly doesn't work now, and it is taking us down a dystopian path. So where we need to get to is essentially focusing on growing assets, having a ubiquitous leadership model where our organizations are more akin to living, sensing, situationally aware organisms, so think super resilient organization, where technology is used for innovation as well as automation. Automation, no problem with it, but automating a dying business model is simply a waste of time. So we need to kind of think beyond automation. And treating our people as cognitive athletes rather than cogs in the machine, and allowing us to play to our humanity, allowing us to be human in the course of the day rather than having to hang up our humanity in the cloakroom or leave it in the car park. This, if you like, experimental, innovation-driven approach is more explorative than exploitative, and therefore is more sustainable. And again, we are playing the infinite game. So forget about your 5-year plan. The name of the game is to stay in the game so that you can continue to play tomorrow. You might wonder why I have said not dystopian rather than utopian. Well, in utopia, we have freedom and security. What's happening here, we are trading security for freedom. So goodbye comfort, goodbye convenience, hello danger, hello precarity, hello being human again. Disruption has actually come to save us. And it will feel painful. The thing is, we have to try and make this transition in as bloodless a way as possible. And that's kind of why I set up the Intelligent Leadership Hub. So to summarize, the world is changing. The world of work is changing. We need to take a more intelligent leadership approach. The good news is it's forcing us to return to our true human nature. However, there's a twist. The 20th century was the era of IT. The 21st century is the era of biology. What with developments in genomics, synthetic biology, bionics, bioinformatics, and even nootropics, the augmentations we're going to see over the next few years will be profound. This has profound implications for us, perhaps as service providers. And of course, are we not going to be this augmented talent as well? This has profound implications for us as consumers, as citizens, and in that most exacting of management sciences, parenting. I believe if we are to reclaim our humanity, escape this dystopian matrix, and return to some form of alignment with the rest of the planet, then we're going to need to build super resilient organizations infused with intelligent leaders. In essence, we all need to become intelligent leaders. Thank you.
Ade?
Yeah,
I knew you were going to challenge us, but early in the morning, that's quite a lot of challenge to absorb. But I appreciate the way in which you have helped us to actually look at our world in such a different manner. And I'm sure, looking at the chat, that you've stimulated people to ask some pretty searching questions of you. So I'd just like to mention to you all that if you would like to read more about what Ade McCormack thinks and says about what he thinks, then go to his own website. So that's his name, Ade McCormack, all one word, lowercase.com. Julia is going to put that in the chat so you don't have to remember that or write it down, and read a bit more about the challenge that he has for us all in terms of thinking about what we should be doing and how we should react to our environment going forward. Thank you so much, Ade, for coming along and giving us that superb presentation. So we're going to go into the Q&A session now. And what I would like you to do is, Julia is going to tell me who is number one in the queue. And I'm going to invite you to unmute and ask your question, and then we'll see where that leads to. And we'll go through all the questions. If for one reason or another we don't get to the end by the time we all have to leave, then Ade and I will have a look at those remaining and find a way to answer you about that particular question. Okay, so Julia, who's first?
Number one is David Gardner. He's got a question.
Okay, Dave, if you unmute yourself, off you go.
Okay, thanks very much, Ade. As Bill was saying, very challenging questions. I guess the heart of my question is you've described the business model or the business way of doing things and being adaptable. But what I was thinking is legislation and governments, for example, the upcoming CSRD, and basically putting all legislation and regulation is trying to restrict that freedom. So are the governments operating in the wrong format in that they need to find a way to phrase legislation that is or permits companies to be adaptable, but yet still gives sort of the ability to hold companies to account when they get things wrong? So if they become too free.
Yes, I mean, that's the crux of the problem, and that's the major roadblock here. Basically, organizations today are being judged on KPIs that drive them towards profit rather than focusing on assets. They are driven towards efficiency rather than developing a comfort with failure. And until we kind of globally agree a different approach to how organizations account for themselves, and this means involving some kind of governments, analysts, and investors, the truly inspiring organizations will be doing all of what I've described in spite of the system, as opposed to because of it. So the fundamental issue is to globally agree that we need a different approach to measuring what defines a successful company. Today, it's largely around growth, so it's growth at all costs, and of course, that's not good for the planet. We need to rethink what success means for organizations going forward. That's, for me, the number one thing. Clearly, boardrooms need to get this message, and of course, the C-suite, which in many respects just operatives for the boardroom, they need to be instructed to behave in this manner. Basically, what I'm advocating, and I don't think it's anything profound, it's common sense if you look at nature, what I'm advocating is the antithesis of how most organizations operate today. That's the fundamental problem we face. But having said that, I mean, I've been involved in, remember, I got involved in some sort of global banking thing, and I remember speaking to a regulator in Singapore, and he was running, or his organization was being run like a Silicon Valley startup. They themselves were experimenting with legislation to see whether it worked, because at the end of the day, it has to benefit the consumer. So we're starting to see the legislators, the regulators trying to keep up with developments, but of course developments are rushing ahead of us, and we don't even know as a species how to kind of assimilate the progress that's happening.
Thank you very much indeed, Dave. Yulia, next question.
Harriet, the second question was from Harriet.
Thank you.
Would you like to ask the question? Thank you.
Good morning, Harriet.
Hi, many thanks. Actually, just leading on from that previous one, I think the discussions going on about the Better Business legislation in the UK is quite an interesting one in relation to what the ramifications of legislation might be. Thank you, great presentation. And it was really interesting to hear different threads of lots of discussions that are going on around finite game, distributive leadership, etc. My specific question, I loved your stuff about the different business models and how I think you said Amazon's business model changes every 4 seconds. Together with that and the list of being humans, I was just wondered what your sources were and whether we're going to get a list of those sources, because you've clearly drawn from many other people's thinking in this presentation, which has been great.
I guess I don't have them as a list, but I always kind of double check them so that I don't get taken to task for making them up, so to speak. But the one about the I mean, if you put those numbers, you know, Amazon, Netflix, and I think I mentioned Google, and it's something like 4 minutes, 16 seconds, and 4 seconds, there is a well sourced article that that states that. So I haven't just kind of plucked them out of the air. And the whole...
I didn't think you had, I just wondered where they came from.
No. The other thing, I mean, I wrote a book on the sort of anthropology side of things, which has references in it. But most of this is not, I mean, most of the kind of anthro side is sort of common sense in many respects. And personally, I've been bashing on about this for about 10 or 15 years. And I've had it pretty much pressure tested, and I've had to kind of refine the model based on what I've learned.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Harriet. Yulia?
Steve Smith.
Mine was more an observation than a question, really. I thought it was fascinating what you were saying about sort of decision making in organisations and how people keep that to themselves. It's almost like a clique or an Illuminati almost, where a senior group deliberately keeps things to themselves and keeps key decisions to themselves so that they can then justify the more extreme rewards that they get. I've personally experienced that. But you also led me to thinking about where you talked about the different quotients, like the sense, decide, act, etc. I think touching on that other point, there's almost another one for me, which is sort of an avarice quotient in terms of there's a big factor about whether people are driven by that extreme money, reward and personal recognition and standing versus what I think you're advocating, which is the greater good. And then I'm not trying to get into politics, but almost like a sort of a corporate socialism of the greater good of the organisation. So just wondered what your thoughts on that.
I guess there's the phrase "much wants more," so to speak. So even though you think these people would have enough, they simply want to have more. In part, maybe it's a measure of how they keep score, how they show that I'm a better CEO than you because I've earned X million and you're earning Y. It's also a natural human characteristic to grab while you can. So when we're out on the savannah, we don't know when we're going to eat next. So when we do eat to almost explosion, so to speak. So maybe that's kind of what's happening at that end. We'd have to ask ourselves, would we be any different if we found ourselves in that situation? Hopefully we'd be more enlightened. But there is a kind of, I think there is a sort of a closed shop going on, and it's propagated by the headhunters. It's propagated to some extent by the top business schools, the top media publications. And this is that there's a handful of CEOs that get bounced around from organization to organization. They're not particularly competent, but they get bounced to the next one just as the damage is starting. And of course, perhaps as an aspirant CEO, I want to join that highly paid, incompetent bunch. But essentially, they've created a moat or whatever. And that's an ecosystem that works out very, very well for all the parties involved. Now, I've got no direct evidence. It's just a kind of observation, so to speak. But it's that sort of thing that needs to be broken up. The lack of distribution of decision making is clearly about a lack of trust.
Yeah.
So people are in the organization not because they have some sort of shared mission, it's because they have to be there to fund their lifestyles. So any conversation, it's always going to be around dancing around the contract, so to speak. The most successful organizations are going to be where the mission of all the stakeholders are aligned. And as we start to see organizations that are genuinely mission driven beyond making a handful of shareholders even richer, we will see kind of multiplier effects when suppliers, the talent, the consumers are all aligned in the mission. That's essentially what it means to be tribal. Now, the term tribal has got negative connotations. It's like we're us and we hate you lot. But in essence, when you look at tribes, within a given tribe, there are multiple different rituals. There's like, it's not just one homogeneous bunch of people, a typical tribe. So in that sense, we kind of need to re-embrace that, because if we all get on the same mission, we're all going to really trust each other. And perhaps the other extreme example would be the sort of special forces. They trust each other with their lives because they have to in the nature of the work that they're doing.
No, fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Julia?
Hanne? Next question from Hanne.
Yes, thank you. So I've been thinking, I've worked in a lot of larger organizations, and what I see sometimes is that, or have seen is that at one point we had a development department where we found out that a lot of various individuals were kind of working on the same development part, not knowing that someone else was doing the same kind of thing. So how do you, I really like the idea that you should share that out with everybody, and they can, go on their path to develop. However, how do you avoid that it's doubled, the same task is done by different individuals, not knowing someone else is doing whatever they're doing, working on the same thing? And also, like, how do you make sure that, at that point, it's not pulling in very different directions?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the root of the question is that how do we be more efficient? And that's, to some extent, the wrong thing to focus on. We want redundancy in our systems. We want things repeated and done in different ways. Our evolution is not through design, it's through making mistakes, it's through accidents, it's through happenstance. And those of us that have a mutation in our genes that is well suited to the environment coming up tend to survive. But to put that to the side, I probably have kind of implied a holacracy in terms of, you know, everybody does kind of whatever they want, so to speak. There needs to be a little bit of autocracy in all of this. There needs to be a clear mission, and the organization needs to be kind of structured, perhaps less around departments, which are optimized to suit the organization, not the market, not around products, which again are optimized to suit the organization, not the market, but to be optimized around the market. So an example of this would be Haier, H-A-I-E-R, a Chinese household appliances manufacturer. They famously took their fridges out into the car park and smashed them with hammers because they were rubbish, in effect. And this was an organization that was a state-owned organization. And what they did was they reshaped the organization into a collection of micro enterprises. So each group of people was a business in its own right. And each business was responsible for the satisfaction of their clients. And it wasn't just the sales guys that did very well and the clients were very happy. Everybody got a share of the rewards. So this kind of multicellular approach would appear to be the way forward. Nature is kind of telling us that. And again, this departmental model is something that I'm concerned about. I'm curious what other people think. I think when something becomes a department, it then institutionalizes the problem, not the solution. In the sense that when you decide we're going to have a DEI function or a sustainability function for that matter, it's almost like the senior team have abdicated responsibility to a department and it's their headache. Whereas these issues need to be woven into the fabric of the organization rather than considered a strategic project, if you like.
I think that sounds really good, because I think also as well, like one of the big problems that I've seen is also working with benchmarking is that in large organizations, everything sort of slows down. Like if you look at the development, and it's not really connected throughout the whole value chain. So everything is very oriented around a specific department. It's not really working together, and everybody doesn't know what is going on in the other end of the value chain. So I think that sounds like a really great way forward. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Hannah. Julia, who's next?
We've got a comment from Slavina. Not a question, but a comment. But if you would like to address it, Slavina, it would be lovely. Thank you.
Well, I think she's there. Okay, are there any more questions while we wait? Sorry, but changing rooms. Okay, she's changing rooms, so we'll wait.
Fine. That's fine. Our next question from Jean-Pierre.
Thank you. Jean-Pierre?
Good morning, Ade. So nice to see you, and thank you for the last-minute invite. As you can see, Ade, last-minute invite, it works by far better than any other way. I would like to know your view, and thank you again for the presentation. I'm witnessing, and I'm not going to share in which organization, but how complicated it is to formulate a strategy those days. It leads to debate, to arguments, and the process is not working. And I've been witnessing that either in the organization I work for the moment or where I'm non-exec director. So I would like to hear your views on, do we still need to formulate the organization's vision and the organization's strategy, or maybe vision more important and relevant than strategy? I would love to hear your views about it.
Sure. I think vision is very, very important. You know, we all need to have a kind of very, we all need to be following the same North Star, so to speak. But because the world is so highly, increasingly disrupted, we need to have the flexibility to change that vision and possibly even have multiple visions if we go down this kind of cellular approach. Because you might say having one vision is like putting all your eggs in one basket. It's like having one business model. Your business model might be thriving at the moment, but next week might get taken out by a free app or a changing consumer sentiment. So whilst I'm not advocating that we should have a portfolio of visions, that would be too complicated to manage, we should be aware that perhaps one is not enough, or even if we have one, it might be transient, so to speak. So that's the first thing. Strategy, or strategic planning in particular, is, as I say, a work of fiction when there are so many macro environmental variables bearing down upon us. But the process of strategic planning is very, very important. So going through the intellectual exercise of what are the threats and the opportunities and so on. Now, what typically happens in strategic meetings is the alpha player gets to dominate, and it's basically all very subjective. So this takes me back to the tribal sense, decide, and act. So this is where the sensing is perhaps undercooked. We need, when we go into preparing strategies, we need to be aware of actually what's happening in our environment. Anything else is an act of, you know, we're kind of making it up, as it were. So organizations, job number one for any organization is to get its sensors in place, so it understands what's happening in the wider world. Because if you don't understand what's happening in the wider world, you're blind in the fog of war, so to speak, and then you're into speculation and guessing and gut feelings. And not to, you know, gut feelings do have a part to play, but they need to be kind of entwined with actual reality. And most organizations today are so inward looking. They believe past successes are indicative of future successes, and they are becoming increasingly decoupled from reality. The tribe that doesn't pay attention to the faint snap of a twig or the growl of an animal in the distance will not be around for very long. We need to be, you know, sensitive. I go to sleep with one eye open. I'm in a semi-paranoid state all the time. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but the point is, if I want to remain economically relevant, I have to keep my eye on the market all the time. That's the mindset I would encourage.
Thank you very much, Ade.
Thank you very much, Ade. Thank you.
Thanks, Jean-Pierre. Slovenia, you are back in another room, yeah? What's your comment? Thank you.
Yeah. So my comment regarding donut economics was because donut economics, actually the main concept applies to the changing the economy, the economic models and anywhere in the world, but they've adapted that framework for business, for changing business models as well. And they have developed tools and resources to help businesses go through that change. They focus actually on the beginning, the starting of the process. And actually a lot of the tools and resources they have designed for people who run workshops, for example, consultants. But essentially the whole concept there is around transitioning from degenerative and divisive actions, behaviors, and practices and investments to regenerative and redistributive ones. So that they offer this deep design model, which framework for it, which spans purpose, networks, governance, ownership, and finance. And I probably we may have run out of time, but if helpful, I can provide a quick summary of what one or two sentences, what each of these key pillars of business enterprise design, actually, what they advocate the change should look like.
Thank you very much, Slovenia. Perhaps we can follow that up a bit later offline with Ade. Yulia, have we got any more questions?
we've got one more last minute question from David Gardner.
Okay, Dave.
So the second question, and this question is purely from a point of ignorance. I must admit, I'm an engineer through and through, not an economist, but I have been subject and worked in businesses where business models have changed, and sometimes when they change incredibly quickly. I mean, I'm horrified to be honest by this 4-second change. It sometimes can lead to a deep sense of frustration for those enacting on them, and workers will turn around and say, oh, what do they want us to do now? No sense of consistency, which perhaps is one vital human nature. So again, how does a changing business model work in practice to avoid that sense of frustration and constant transition? And you say that sometimes transition is good, but how far do you go?
Yeah, this is a classic problem. You typically imagine the C-suite, they'll hear a phrase like big data or AI, and they'll say, we need to have that, get us some, as if it's some sort of product off the shelf, or the company down the road has changed its business model, we need to do the same. As somebody who's involved in organizational transformation, my recommendation is not to transform. If you've got a business model that is generating cash, you would be unwise to disrupt it, in effect. By all means, automate it. By all means, make it as sustainable as you possibly can. But beyond that, don't change it. If HSBC decided to put all its people through some sort of, I don't know, critical systems thinking course, or lateral thinking course, or whatever it is, you would have a couple of 100,000 bemused people. They have been brought in as process workers. They're not going to turn into Salvador Dali after a workshop. And if they did, the notion of creative banking is not necessarily a good thing. So you've really kind of ruined the business model, even though your intentions were good. So what I advocate is automate, improve the existing business model as much as you can, but don't change it, because that is your primary source of cash. But what you need to start doing pretty quickly is to develop parallel business models. And that could be through acquisition, that could be through growing your own. And I'm not just talking about different products and services, I'm talking about different go-to-markets, I'm talking about different financial models as well. So the business of being in business in this post-industrial era is having a portfolio of organizations, of not having your eggs in one basket, so to speak. So to your point, you will just frustrate and confuse people, and you will have brought people in initially to do a particular job, and now you're asking them to do something that's kind of tangential to that, and that is very disruptive. That creates great anxiety, and that threatens the cash flows that you're actually enjoying up to that point in time.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you very much. Any more questions, Julia? No? Okay. Well, we're past the witching hour by 10 minutes, so thanks for everybody for hanging on. Obviously, as a lot of people have had to rush off for other things. Unless anybody sort of puts their hand up, I'm going to sort of suggest that we end the session here. And obviously, Ade, I'd like to thank you so much for not only your presentation, which, as I said earlier, was incredibly stimulating, and but also for answering the questions so fully. Just like to mention again, if you want to talk to me about World Sustainability Collective and joining us, then please put your name in the chat and your contact details, and we can have a one-to-one. We're planning to have another event in September. As yet, we have not identified what we're going to talk about and who will talk about it, but that will be advised to you. So again, if you want to know about our future events, then again, put it in the chat and let me know. And in the meantime, I'd like to thank you all for coming along this morning and making this what I feel has been a successful session. So I'd like to say thank you very much, and we'll wrap it up here.
Good to see you, Bill. Great.
Yeah, nice to see you. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay. Right. Bye for now.